It was the blaring siren that first shattered the calm of that warm Saturday morning, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even know why. I was in the kitchen, cutting fruit, the window open to let in the breeze and the sound of my daughter's laughter. She was outside on the front lawn, crawling in wide, wobbly circles, her version of freedom. Her legs don't work the way other kids do, but her arms are strong, her smile even stronger. She loved the grass, the sun on her face, the little butterflies that danced around her. She called it her green world. She had just learned to push herself a few feet farther each week, building toward the day she might be able to stand. It wasn't just therapy, it was joy. Then the truck pulled up. Big, white, official. Two officers in khaki uniforms stepped out. I rushed to the porch, confused. We hadn't called anyone. I assumed maybe they were lost. One of them glanced past me toward the lawn. His face twitched with something like discomfort. The other looked down at his clipboard and said, "Ma'am, we received a call from a neighbor about a stray animal, possibly injured, crawling across the property line." I blinked. What? I followed their eyes, my heart dropping into my stomach. They weren't looking for a dog or a raccoon. They were looking at my daughter, my 7-year-old disabled daughter, crawling across the lawn with her fists clenched in the grass, giggling. I stepped in front of them instinctively. "That's my child," I said, my voice trembling. "She has a disability. She's in physical therapy. She's not an animal." The taller officer's face flushed. "Ma'am, we're just responding to a call. We have to investigate." I couldn't speak. My brain couldn't process what was happening. That someone, some neighbor, looked at my little girl, crawling with determination, and instead of seeing a child trying her hardest, saw something less than human. Something they thought needed to be reported. My throat burned as I asked, "Who called this in?" The officers wouldn't say, but I already knew. I didn't need a name. I'd seen the way she looked at us. At my daughter. I had heard her say more than once, "That's not appropriate for public view." And now, she had followed through, calling animal control on a child. As they walked across the grass to verify their report, I scooped up my daughter and held her close, shielding her from their eyes, from the humiliation, from a world that saw her crawling and decided she didn't belong. She looked up at me, confused. "Did I do something bad?" she asked softly. My voice cracked as I whispered, "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong." They did. My daughter was born with cerebral palsy, spastic diplegia, to be exact. From the moment she came into the world, the doctor said things in clinical tones that buried hope under layers of caution. She may never walk. Mobility will be limited. Prepare for significant physical therapy. I remember holding her, impossibly small and warm in my arms, and thinking, "You will move however you need to, baby, and we'll move with you." And that's exactly what we've done ever since. Our lives became structured around therapy appointments, early intervention specialists, braces, walkers, and an ocean of terms most parents never have to learn. And through it all, she smiled. She laughed. She made silly faces and blew raspberries and watched butterflies like they were her personal magic show. She never let her legs stop her from discovering her world. She just learned to explore it differently. By the time she was 3, she had figured out how to scoot on her hips. By 5, she had developed her own little crawl, a blend of upper body strength, core control, and sheer willpower. She started calling it her dragon crawl because dragons don't care if they fly or crawl. They always get where they want. And to her, the backyard lawn was her kingdom. Every day after school or therapy, she would ask to go outside. She didn't want screens or swings. She wanted grass. The texture under her palms, the sunlight warming her arms, the breeze on her cheeks. That's where she came alive. Her therapists encouraged it too. Crawling wasn't just fun, it was progress. Her coordination improved. Her endurance stretched. Her doctors told us, if she keeps going like this, she'll be up on a walker by next year. Every inch she covered on that lawn brought her one step closer to independence. And it wasn't just physical. Crawling in the grass gave her confidence. She'd wave at neighbors as they passed, showing off her speed. "Look at me," she'd shout proudly. "I'm going to beat the wind." Sometimes she'd bring chalk with her, scribbling hearts or stars onto the sidewalk next to where she crawled. Other times she'd just lie on her back, panting from the effort, whispering to herself, "I'm getting strong." I would sit on the porch with tears in my eyes, watching her fight without even realizing she was fighting. Because to her, she wasn't overcoming anything. She was just living, exploring, growing. And I was so proud of every inch she conquered. Of course, there were stares. There always are. Some people smile, some look away quickly, unsure of what to say. But then there are the ones who frown, the ones who whisper, the ones who see her not as a child, but as a disruption, a spectacle, an inconvenience. And in our new HOA-run neighborhood, those whispers felt heavier. The first week we moved in, I heard one neighbor say, "I didn't know this was going to be a special needs house." Another asked if we planned to build a fence or something just to keep things tidy. I brushed it off, tried to focus on the good, on the families who waved, the children who said hi, the quiet roads where she could crawl safely. But there was one neighbor who never waved, never smiled, just watched, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Karen. She never introduced herself, never asked how we were settling in. Instead, she began leaving subtle reminders of her authority, reminders that looked like rule books printed out and slipped into our mailbox. Notes about lawn maintenance standards, about approved outdoor activity, and about preserving aesthetic harmony. The language was always vague, but the message was clear: your daughter doesn't fit here. I tried to ignore her. We had done nothing wrong. My daughter had every right to enjoy her home, just like any other child. But it started to wear on me. I began checking the front lawn nervously before letting her outside. I worried about how long she stayed out there, whether she was too visible. And every time I caught myself thinking like that, I felt sick because I knew the message was seeping in. But Lily? She didn't notice. Not yet. She still saw the lawn as her playground, the sky as her ceiling, and her own effort as something worth celebrating. When she crawled, she was free. When she collapsed into the grass, giggling, flushed with pride, she wasn't thinking about HOA rules or sideways glances. She was thinking about how much stronger her arms had gotten, how close she was to her next milestone, how, maybe next month, she'd crawl all the way from the porch to the mailbox and back without stopping. That was her dream. That was her triumph. And that's what someone tried to destroy when they picked up the phone, not to offer help, not to ask questions, but to report a stray. Because to them, Lily wasn't a child trying to become stronger. She was something that didn't belong, something out of place. But what they didn't understand is that this place, this house, this lawn, this world belongs to her just as much as anyone else. The first time I met Karen, she had that practiced smile, tight, polite, and utterly hollow. She showed up on our doorstep 3 days after we moved in, holding a potted plant like a peace offering, though her eyes never quite softened. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her tone syrupy. "We're all very close-knit here. We like things quiet, clean, and consistent." I thanked her, trying to be gracious, though her wording already felt a little off. As she handed me the plant, she glanced past me, into the house. Her gaze lingered too long. "Oh," she added with a little tilt of her head, "I saw your daughter the other day, outside, crawling on the lawn." She said it like she was describing a raccoon rummaging through garbage, not a 7-year-old child working through her physical therapy goals. I nodded, resisting the urge to bristle. Yes, that's Lily. She has cerebral palsy. Crawling helps her build strength. It's part of her therapy. Karen's lips curled into a thin, unreadable smile. Yes. I wasn't sure. We have a lot of foot traffic here and children playing. I wasn't sure if that was safe." I blinked. "Safe?" I asked. "She stays on our lawn." Karen shifted, on her heels. "Oh, of course. I just meant cleanliness, hygiene. Grass gets treated with chemicals. It might be uncomfortable for the other children to see." That was her concern? That Lily's crawling made other children uncomfortable? I told myself not to react, that maybe this was ignorance, not malice. But over the next few weeks, it became clear that Karen's discomfort wasn't passive, it was targeted. I'd catch her watching from her window when Lily was outside. She'd walk by slowly with her clipboard, pretending to make notes about other properties, but always glancing at Lily. Once I was sitting on the porch and she stopped at the edge of our yard. She said, the HOA has certain expectations about how lawns are used. We want to keep things looking respectful. I raised an eyebrow. Respectful. She nodded. This isn't a daycare. It's a residential community. She said it calmly, like it was just a reminder. But I heard the threat in her words. One afternoon, she brought over a printed copy of the HOA's Community Etiquette Guidelines, a document I had never seen before. Just in case you hadn't had time to review this section, she said, tapping the page with her finger. We try to discourage loitering and disruptive behavior in open lawn spaces. It's for aesthetic consistency. My blood boiled. Karen, I said slowly, my daughter is not loitering. She's playing. She's working hard to reach developmental milestones. Karen shrugged. Of course. I just worry about setting precedents. If one child is crawling around, what's to stop others from, using the lawn however they please? That was the first time I felt real rage toward her. Because it wasn't about rules. It wasn't about guidelines. It was about control. About keeping her version of normal unchallenged. My daughter didn't fit her image of what childhood should look like, and instead of expanding her view, Karen wanted to shrink the world around Lily until she disappeared into the house and never came out again. Still, I tried to de-escalate. She has a right to be outside, I said firmly. Karen's response? A saccharine smile and a slow shake of the head. That's not how we do things here. That phrase stuck with me. Not wrong, not against the rules, just not how we do things. As if the neighborhood's unspoken code of uniformity was more sacred than a child's right to crawl freely on the grass her parents paid for. I watched her walk away that day, her shoulders squared, her clipboard tucked like a badge against her side, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Karen wasn't just uncomfortable. She was planning something, because people like her don't stop at words. They escalate. They write emails. They make calls. And when they see something different, something beautiful and brave and crawling toward hope, they don't celebrate it. They try to make it disappear. It began with the stares, subtle at first, lingering glances over coffee mugs, neighbors pausing just a second too long during their morning dog walks. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that it was all in my head, but then it grew louder, not in sound but in presence. Doors would close a little faster when we passed. Conversations would trail off when I approached with Lily in her wheelchair or crawling beside me. At first, I thought it was the usual discomfort people sometimes have around disabilities, the kind that stems from ignorance, not malice. But this was different, coordinated, cold, a shift in the air that felt too synchronized to be coincidence. And I knew who orchestrated it. Karen had found her audience. It wasn't long before the paper notices started appearing in our mailbox. Not formal citations, just short, typed reminders printed in 12-point times New Roman on unmarked sheets of paper. The first one said, "Please be advised that continued crawling on lawns may lead to unintended lawn damage." I read it 3 times, each time slower, more stunned than the last. Lawn damage? From a 38-pound 7-year-old with bent knees and trembling arms? I crumpled it up and threw it away, telling myself it was a one-off. But more followed. Residents are reminded that unsupervised children should remain within fenced boundaries for safety reasons. HOA policy discourages behaviors that mimic pets in communal view. That one hit, like a punch to the gut, was that what they saw when Lily crawled? Not progress, not bravery, just an animal? The most disturbing part wasn't the wording. It was the fact that no one signed the notes. No HOA letterhead. No name. Just the silence of anonymous cruelty. But one afternoon, a neighbor I barely knew stopped at the edge of our driveway as I was helping Lily into her walker. He looked over his shoulder and said, "I'd keep an eye out. There's been talk. Karen's not happy with what she calls your yard activity. I asked what he meant. He glanced around, lowered his voice, and muttered, she says it's unsanitary, that she's brought it up at meetings, that others agree. Then he walked away like he hadn't just told me that people were gathering to shame a child for touching grass. I tried to keep things normal for Lily. I smiled, encouraged her to go outside, to keep pushing forward. But I couldn't ignore the shift. Every time she crawled, I felt like a spotlight was burning into our yard. I imagined phone cameras recording. I imagined whispers behind shutters. She noticed too. One day she paused halfway to her chalk bucket and asked, why don't the neighbors wave anymore? I didn't know what to say. Maybe they're just busy. I lied and hated how easily it came out. Then came the formal HOA letters, this time with a seal and signature. The first one cited us for excessive wear on turf and visible staining in common view. I stared at the envelope, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might break. Visible staining? From a child in sweatpants crawling through grass? Was she supposed to hover? The next letter was worse. It referred to unauthorized use of front lawn spaces for activities resembling animal play. I almost dropped it. They were doubling down, taking Karen's words and turning them into policy. I appealed both letters, attaching Lily's medical documents, a letter from her therapist, and a full explanation. The HOA didn't respond. The letters kept coming. But the moment I broke was a Tuesday morning, quiet and clear. Lily had drawn a chalk mural on the walkway the day before, little hearts and stars with her name written in big, crooked letters, Lily's lawn. She was so proud. She had used her whole upper body to crawl along the concrete, brushing color with her hands, breathing hard but beaming. I had taken photos. I was going to print them and hang them in her room. But the next morning it was gone. Washed clean. Not by rain. By someone's hand. And taped to our mailbox was a note. No signature. No apology. Just 6 words in neat, impersonal print. The lawn is not a daycare. I didn't cry. Not then. I was too numb. Too exhausted from pretending everything was okay. I just took Lily back inside, helped her into her seat, and told her the chalk must have faded. She didn't argue. She just nodded, and I saw her curl her hands into her lap instead of asking to draw again. That was the real damage. Not the lawn, not the chalk, but the quiet way a child's light begins to dim when the world tells her she's unwelcome in it. Karen wasn't just targeting us now, she was winning. She was weaponizing silence, turning neighbors into bystanders, turning rules into weapons. And it was working. But what she didn't realize was that we weren't alone anymore. And she had no idea what was coming next. It was supposed to be a good day, one of the first truly warm afternoons of spring. The kind of day where the breeze doesn't bite and the sun wraps around you like a soft hug. Lily had been doing well in therapy that week, more control in her crawl, fewer collapses, and even the beginnings of pushing up into a kneel. She'd earned her reward, and as always, she chose her favorite. Grass time. I set out a small blanket near the edge of the lawn, brought out her sidewalk chalk, and watched as she inched forward, palms flat, legs dragging lightly behind her. She was beaming. Her arms were strong and steady. She paused every few feet to draw a star or trace a wobbly flower. She kept laughing breathless, saying, "Look at me go, Mommy." I cheered her on like I always did. I was so proud, so full of joy, watching her move freely in a world that so often tried to confine her. I didn't see the truck at first. It wasn't until the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires caught my ear that I turned, and everything stopped. A large, white, municipal vehicle was pulling up beside the curb. The words "animal control" were printed clearly on the side in blocky black letters. My stomach twisted before my mind could even make sense of it. 2 officers stepped out, both wearing tin uniforms and matching frowns. One held a clipboard. The other was scanning the lawn. I stood up slowly, heart pounding, already sensing something was wrong. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. The clipboard officer walked up, glanced past me toward Lily, and said, we received a report about a stray animal, possibly injured, crawling around the yard. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't process the words. A stray? Injured? Crawling? I turned and followed his line of sight to my daughter. Lily was maybe 6 feet away, now paused beside a chalk drawing of a rainbow, looking up at the officers curiously, and then I realized what they were saying. They didn't see a dog. They didn't see a raccoon. They saw her, my daughter, crawling on the grass, laughing, alive, and someone had called animal control. My breath caught in my throat. That's my child. I said, the words dry and sharp as glass. She's disabled. She has cerebral palsy. She crawls for therapy for fun. She's not a stray animal. The officers exchanged glances. One of them had the decency to look ashamed. Ma'am, he said carefully, we have to follow up on all calls. The report said there was something moving oddly low to the ground, possibly a dog in distress, or what? I snapped, the rage finally breaking through. Or a creature? A rodent? What exactly did they say? The clipboard officer checked a sheet. Caller stated there was a limping creature crawling through the lawn, potentially diseased or neglected. I felt like I'd been slapped. I walked past them, scooped Lily up into my arms, and held her tight. Her little hands curled around my shoulder. Mommy, she whispered, what's happening? I couldn't answer. I just kissed her forehead and turned back to the officers. Do we look like a disease to you? I asked, does my daughter's body make you nervous? Because someone around here thinks a disabled child is the same as a wounded animal. To their credit, the officers didn't escalate. One of them apologized. Genuinely. He looked at Lily and said softly, you're doing a great job, sweetheart. But the damage had already been done. Lily started to cry. Not loudly, but in that small, shuddering way where a child doesn't understand why the world just got meaner. She buried her face in my neck. The truck idled in front of our home for 10 more minutes, the flashing lights washing our windows in red and blue as neighbors peeked through blinds and cracked open doors. And I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. This was Karen. Because only someone deliberately cruel would describe a child as a creature. Only someone obsessed with control would use the phrase potentially diseased about a little girl in sweatpants holding sidewalk chalk. I didn't need to see the caller ID. I didn't need to hear her voice. This had her fingerprints all over it, right down to the shame it was meant to induce. But what she didn't realize was that it had the opposite effect. I wasn't ashamed. I was furious, and I was done being quiet. That night, I filed a report. I compiled the body cam footage, our porch security video, and the call transcript I requested through public records. I began typing a post. I uploaded a photo of Lily's rainbow, drawing next to her therapy gloves, and I wrote, today, someone called animal control on my daughter because she was crawling on the grass. Not a dog, not a raccoon. My 7-year-old daughter with cerebral palsy. If this makes you angry, it should. And then I pressed post. After the sirens stopped and the animal control truck finally rumbled down the street, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was raw, loud in its own cruel way. Lily clung to me that night, refusing to let go of my shirt as I tried to change her into pajamas. Her eyes, once so full of curiosity, now flinched at every creak of the floor, every knock from a closing cabinet. Are they coming back? She asked. The animal people? I swallowed the lump in my throat and told her no, that it was over. But it wasn't. Not really. Because the damage doesn't end when the lights turn off and the officials leave. It lingers. It creeps into the spaces where a child once felt safe. The next day, she wouldn't go outside. She wouldn't even go near the front window. When I asked if she wanted to draw again, she shook her head and whispered, I don't want to be weird. That broke me in a way I didn't know I could break. Someone had made her feel less than human, and now she was trying to disappear into herself to avoid that pain again. I tried to stay calm, tried to be reasonable. I emailed the HOA, not accusing, just explaining. I laid out everything that had happened. The call, the visit, the language used in the report. I told them how traumatized my daughter now was, how their lack of response to Karen's previous notes and complaints had allowed this to happen. I attached the call log I had obtained. A public record request confirmed the exact time and phone number used to file the report. And it was Karen's. No surprise. Still, I didn't attack. I simply asked for accountability, for reassurance, for a sign that our community wouldn't allow this kind of behavior again. What I got in return was a generic response from the HOA president: "Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention." The HOA cannot police individual behavior, but encourages all residents to adhere to community standards and treat one another with respect. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement, no condemnation. Just empty words that said, "We see it, but we won't touch it." I sat at the table rereading the email while Lily played with a frayed corner of her therapy mat, slowly tearing at the stitching. That email was their answer. Silence, cloaked in polite corporate language. They weren't going to stop her. They weren't going to protect us. They were going to let her do it again. I spoke to one neighbor, just one. She was a kind woman, a retired nurse who'd once waved at Lily every time she passed. She came to my door a few days later with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know it would get that far." I was confused until she explained that she had overheard Karen talking about it, how she jokingly told another board member that maybe animal control would respond quicker than the HOA. She laughed about it. Laughed. She said she thought it would scare you. Make you think twice about letting her crawl out there like that. The nurse looked at me horrified. She didn't think they'd actually show up. But when they did, she just shrugged and said, "Well, maybe now they'll listen." I thanked her. And then I closed the door and cried harder than I had in months. Not because Karen called, but because someone could call a child's struggle for independence a nuisance. Because someone saw courage and called it a spectacle. Because someone decided humiliation was an appropriate tool to enforce their warped version of community standards. And because a system an HOA board meant to protect and serve decided silence was easier than justice, Lily didn't go out again for days. When I finally carried her to the porch for some sunlight, she kept her head down the whole time, asking in a whisper, "Is the lawn safe now?" I told her yes. I told her it always had been. But inside, I was already planning what to do next. Because if the people who were supposed to keep us safe wouldn't speak up, then I would. And this time, I wasn't just going to speak. I was going to make sure the whole world heard us. I didn't release the video to go viral. I released it because I was tired of being silent. Tired of walking Lily through the shadows of our own neighborhood like she was something to hide. Tired of smiling through gritted teeth while a woman like Karen warped policy into cruelty and used it to humiliate a child. I uploaded the footage from our doorbell camera with shaking hands, unsure of what the world would say, but knowing in my bones that staying quiet meant accepting what had been done to Lily as normal. I included the original audio, the officers explaining the stray animal call, the look on their faces when they realized it was a child, and my voice, raw, furious, trembling, telling them she's not a stray. She's my daughter. I wrote a short caption. My disabled daughter was crawling in our front yard when someone called animal control on her. She was treated like a creature, not a child. This is what ableism looks like. This is what HOA harassment looks like. Hashtag let Lily play, hashtag disability is not a threat. Then I clicked post, and the internet lit up. The first few comments were from friends, shock, outrage, support. Then it snowballed. A pediatric nurse in Chicago shared it. Then a disability rights lawyer in Texas. Then a mother from Florida whose son also uses crawling as therapy. By the end of the night, the video had 500,000 views. By morning, it had over 5 million. The hashtags trended on Twitter. Hashtag let Lily play. Hashtag crawl with Lily. Hashtag shame the HOA. People were furious, not just for Lily, but for what her story represented. Children being excluded because of disability. HOAs enforcing silence over humanity. Strangers with control deciding who gets to feel safe and who doesn't. It struck a nerve, and the country responded. Journalists started calling, first local, then national. News vans parked outside our house. I hesitated at first, afraid of exposing Lily further, but she surprised me. When I explained what was happening, when I showed her the supportive messages people were sending, she smiled for the first time in days. She touched my phone screen where someone had written, "Lily is braver than half the adults I know," and said, "They like my crawling?" I laughed through tears. "They love your crawling, baby. They think you're a superhero." That night, I let her pick the photo we'd use for her first TV interview. She chose one of her in the grass, arms wide like she was flying. The story hit national morning shows, disability rights blogs, advocacy podcasts. Parents shared their own experiences, kids being banned from playgrounds for using adaptive equipment, therapy animals being barred from HOA communities, ramps being labeled as eyesores. Our story gave people permission to speak. And in that rising tide, something else happened. People began digging into Karen's past. Screenshots surfaced, old neighborhood Facebook posts where she mocked residents for bringing down curb appeal with strollers and medical devices. Anonymous tips rolled in. One HOA whistleblower sent us emails where Karen had written, "They need to keep that girl out of sight. It's upsetting to the neighborhood." That was the turning point. We handed everything to our attorney, who, by then, was working pro bono with a disability justice nonprofit that had seen the video and immediately offered support. We filed a formal complaint with the Americans with Disabilities Act office. We filed civil charges for harassment, defamation, and emotional damages. Our legal team subpoenaed HOA board communications and discovered Karen had filed multiple unofficial complaints against us, none based in law, all filled with language like unhygienic, disruptive, and the worst one, subhuman behavior. That phrase was underlined in red in the legal filing. It was the sentence that made the judge's jaw clench during the pretrial hearing. As word spread, Lily became a symbol, not of pity, but of perseverance. People around the country started posting photos of their kids crawling in support, writing for Lily in chalk on their sidewalks, lawns, even front porches. One dad built a little ramp for his son, decorated it with stars, and called it the Lily Lane. A disability rights group in California launched a new campaign, #CrawlingIsCourage. And through it all, Karen stayed silent. But silence was no longer a shield, it was a spotlight. By the time the HOA president publicly announced Karen's removal from the board and issued a formal apology, it was too late for reputation control. Her name was already part of a national discussion. Her behavior a cautionary tale. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like we were fighting alone. We had an army, an invisible one, made up of parents and therapists and strangers who believed that no child should ever be treated like Lily was. But most of all, we had Lily, who 1 week after the video went viral, crawled back onto the lawn, took a piece of chalk, and wrote in big pink letters, "I'm not a dog. I'm a dragon." And this dragon had just ignited a fire no one could ignore. For years, Karen wielded her power behind closed doors and hollow smiles, hiding behind HOA language, knowing full well that as long as she wore the mask of order, she could get away with nearly anything. But when our story exploded across the internet, that mask cracked, and what poured out couldn't be polished or explained away. Within days of the video reaching national attention, a formal investigation into the HOA was launched. Journalists began digging. Residents started talking, and in the middle of it all, someone, maybe a whistleblower, maybe a furious former board member, leaked a cache of internal HOA emails. And there it was in black and white, a message from Karen to the board, dated just 3 days before she called animal control. The subject line read, "Ongoing nuisance, lawn incident." The body was worse. "The child continues to crawl across their yard like an animal. Neighbors are complaining. This behavior reflects poorly on our community. If the family won't do something, perhaps the appropriate authorities should be contacted. It's becoming a public disturbance." That phrase, public disturbance, hit like a lightning bolt. My daughter, crawling on her own lawn, working through therapy, smiling through her sweat, was labeled a disturbance. and the world saw it. The email went viral. News anchors read it on air. Disability advocates called it hate speech. Civil rights attorneys called it legal ammunition. Comment sections flooded with rage and disbelief. Memes popped up. Photos of children crawling joyfully in the grass, overlaid with the sarcastic phrase, "Call animal control." The tide had turned, and this time, the shame wasn't ours. It was hers. Karen was officially removed from the HOA board by unanimous vote within 48 hours of the leak. But it wasn't just a symbolic gesture. She became the face of everything wrong with unchecked HOA power. Our legal team pushed forward with a civil harassment suit, and the ADA complaint was picked up by a federal investigator. When questioned, Karen initially tried to deny everything, claiming she was simply following protocol. But the emails, the video, and public outrage left no room for spin. Her local reputation shattered. Parents at the nearby school began a petition to ban her from volunteering. Businesses posted signs that read, "We believe crawling is brave. Hashtag let Lily play." Even her own HOA community turned against her. For years, she had been the enforcer. Now, she was the pariah. She stopped leaving her house. The blinds that once peeked out at Lily's every move now stayed tightly shut. The same neighbors who once stayed silent now whispered about Karen in public, openly apologizing for ever following her lead. One elderly couple sent us cookies with a handwritten note that said, "We see you now, and we see her. We're sorry we didn't speak up sooner." Another neighbor planted bright pink flowers along the edge of their lawn with a sign that said, "Lily's garden, all are welcome." The culture of the neighborhood had changed, and not because the HOA wanted it, but because the community demanded it. The HOA president, who had initially brushed us off with a generic email, also resigned. In his public statement, he admitted that a culture of passive cruelty had taken root under his watch and that failure to act had led to preventable harm. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was a start. The board was restructured, new bylaws were proposed, and a community-wide vote passed a motion to establish an accessibility and equity committee. Lily's name was printed on the first meeting agenda under Inspiration for Change. Karen, once the queen of HOA order, was now being sued, shunned, and held accountable, not just by us, but by an entire network of people who believed no child should be treated as less than human. I don't know if she ever truly understood what she did. I don't know if she ever will. But I do know this. She will never again call herself the voice of the community. Because the community found its voice, and it was Lily's. Lily stood on the lawn on a quiet Sunday morning, right where it all began, just a few feet from the patch of grass where she once crawled joyfully and unknowingly became a target. But this time, she wasn't crawling. She wasn't even holding her chalk. She was standing, wobbly, a little shaky, but standing tall in her walker, gripping the handles with tiny knuckles white with determination. Her therapist, her dad, and I had been working with her for weeks, helping her build toward this very moment. But it wasn't just physical therapy that brought her here. It was pride, purpose, fire. She wanted to stand here because it had once been taken from her. Because this lawn, once painted with cruelty and shame, now bore chalk messages from neighbors. "We love you, Lily. Keep going, Lily. Crawl, walk, fly." The night before, a dozen families had gathered with candles and sidewalk chalk, creating a circle of love where judgment once stood. The same neighborhood that had once turned its back now came out to cheer, their voices trembling with tears and awe as she pushed up, trembling, but rising. The new HOA board had honored Lily during their first community-wide meeting, declaring a policy change known as the Lily Amendment, an explicit protection of visible therapeutic activity, inclusive language in all HOA documentation, and a promise that no child would ever again be treated as an eyesore for existing differently. They even installed a small wooden plaque at the edge of our yard that read, "This is Lily's lawn. Crawling is courage." It wasn't just a win for us, it was a shift in culture. Schools started reaching out to us, asking to speak about inclusion. A disability rights nonprofit featured Lily in their newsletter. One morning, we received a package from a mom across the country. Inside was a pair of tiny therapy gloves, a photo of her own daughter crawling, and a note that read, "Because of Lily, my daughter's not afraid anymore." But the most beautiful transformation happened inside Lily herself. The shame they tried to plant never took root. The silence they tried to force never held. One day, she looked at me and said, "Mommy, remember when they called me a dog?" I froze, unsure how to respond. But she smiled, eyes twinkling, and added, "That's silly. Dogs are awesome. But I'm a dragon, and dragons stand." I couldn't speak. I just nodded through my tears, because she was right. She had stood, and she wasn't just standing for herself. She was standing for every child who had ever been told they didn't belong, for every parent who had ever been made to feel like their child's joy was a nuisance, for everyone who had ever felt small, dismissed, or dehumanized for daring to exist openly in a world that tries to hide difference. Now, when she goes outside, she walks a few steps in her walker, then lowers herself to crawl again, not because she has to, but because she chooses to. Because it's her body, her lawn, her journey. And no one, not Karen, not the HOA, not the world, gets to tell her how to move through it. If this story made you angry, good. If it made you cry, feel helpless, or want to shout from the rooftops, even better. Because that means your heart is still beating for justice. That means you're still capable of being outraged by cruelty, especially the kind that wears a polite smile and hides behind a clipboard. What happened to Lily wasn't just one neighbor's prejudice, it was the product of a system that too often chooses uniformity over humanity. A system that sees disability as disorder. That punishes children for existing in public. Calling animal control on a disabled child isn't just outrageous, it's inhumane. But it's also real. It happened. It happens all the time in neighborhoods like mine, where HOA boards forget that community means care, not control. That's why I created this channel, the HOA Stories. Because there's so many more Lilies out there. Children shamed for their wheelchairs, families threatened for their ramps, parents fined because their kids play too loudly or look too different. These are not isolated events. These are part of a pattern. And the only way we break that pattern is by telling the truth loudly, publicly, unapologetically. If you've ever been targeted, shamed, or silenced in your own community, share your story. If you've ever watched someone else get treated unfairly and didn't know what to do, now you know. You speak. You post. You fight. You crawl. You rise. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the HOA Stories. Share the story. Let others see what real courage looks like, not just in the courtroom, but in the quiet power of a little girl crawling in the grass like she owns the world. Because now she does.